Yeah.
is watching.
We should be able to see that. Hey, everybody, just me and Brian talking tech here, but yeah, you should be able to see people on the people
Mm.
side of the screen where it says yeah, chat, people, lounge. Hey, everybody, welcome to a special, very first evening edition of the Boston New Technology Fireside Chat series. And I figured who could be a better choice to kick things off with us than the ever awesome, perpetually awesome Brian Towne Autumn. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, a lot of really cool stuff, and then we're going to be sharing this up on our YouTube as well. So if you're one of those people that had a lot of food and wine yesterday at Thanksgiving and you're just not feeling like even getting on your laptop, no worries. You'll probably watch this a couple of days later. Welcome, Brian. I want to hand things over to you right away, bro, to give us like an intro and any other thoughts that might be on your mind. Besides, why did I sign up for this?
So my name is Brian Autumn. I am one of the lead organizers for Boston Code and Coffee, which is one of the largest software engineering communities in Boston. I also work as a software concept accelerator for a large fintech firm, and I'm currently playing around with the founder space, possibly starting up my own startup at some point soon.
All that is really super cool. So,
Yeah, I have a lot of fun.
yeah, you certainly do. And I certainly have a lot of fun with you with all the things that we're collaborating on that I'll also get into in a bit. But yeah, let's just get things started here. I mean, you gave us a little bit about your background and what you're currently focusing on, but I'm one of those people that, especially when I kick fireside chats off, I want to know like, what was your, what was like the inception point, the entry point? Like, what got you into being involved with like tech communities, doing tech events? Like, what was that initial like burst of inspiration? I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I've always been a very socially minded person and community engaged person. I've always had a fascination with leadership and how people come together. I think that at the end of the day, like we're human and human needs community. Like we need other people in order to like connect to be successful in the things that we do. But I think what has spurred on like my current connection to sort of tech community, especially in Boston, was the pandemic. Is that the pandemic went through and just wiped out the Boston tech community. So you can go onto meetup.com and you can find all sorts of groups that used to exist before the pandemic. And it's like a graveyard of like, especially January, November, December, January last year, like there was just no one doing anything. Like there was a handful of groups that tried to do things online, but I think it's hard to build like a cohesive community with only using a virtual presence, not the same kind you can in a physical form. And so I was trying to connect with people as the pandemic was tapering off, and there wasn't really a whole lot of community people to connect to. So I ended up going to a random small like networking event that had like 10, 15 people at a bar where someone was trying to sell a pyramid scheme. And I was connected with a person named Daniel who came from St. Louis and wanted to start up a Code and Coffee in Boston. So he did one in St. Louis, came here, was looking for people to help out. I thought it was going to be a small sort of like operation where we'd have like 5 or 10 people and we just sit around talking code, being all technical. And then he worked with the national director of Code and Coffee, Steve, to set up the first event that I went to, and thinking that we would have like 10 people. First event we had over 100 RTPs. And since then, like we've done, I think about like 23 or so events, and like on average, we get about like 100 to 120 RSVPs for the events throughout the year. And it's been particularly exciting for me because when I saw that, I immediately jumped on as one of the lead organizers. So we have 3 lead organizers to help like bring community back into Boston, especially because of how big Boston is as a tech community.
So you just said a lot there that I want to like go through piece by piece. First, like I'm so glad that you were able to become a part of all this because, and I know that I'm not just speaking for myself, bro, but you truly are like one of the most engaging and engaged people like in this community, like helping to not only convene opportunities, which in itself is like really noble, but the way that you like deal with people, the way that you make people feel welcome and included, it's just super sweet. So I just wanted to thank you for that before we get into this any further. And I remember when you and I first met, I believe it was the situation that we were even talking about, that whole like, meetup.com graveyard, which I've gone through, like having to like evaluate, partnership opportunities, having to evaluate how Boston New Technology is itself showing up in the community. And it's sad. I mean, there are so many groups that, by the way, were those like really cool boutique tech chapters that I used to like go to on any random weekday night, and there would be like pizza and coding. There was like a bunch of groups for female technologists too that I know a lot of my buddies used to go to, where they would just talk about really cool topics. And you don't really see as much of that anymore. But what's also interesting is I think I've heard this from several people lately, and I want to know your opinion on it specifically. Do you think that when it comes to like the in-person element in and of itself, do you think that the Boston startup and tech community is more or less back? And if so, what do you think has changed, and what about that makes you excited? So that's kind of a three-part, kind of gave you a question three there. So question three, rather, three questions on the tree. So yeah, have at it.
Yeah. So one thing I'm really excited is I think like the community around tech and founder space, where I think there's like two slightly different communities in and around Boston. We have like the founder space, which is a lot more sort of like entrepreneurial in nature, and then we have what I would call like the techie space, which is a lot more of like playing around with technology, building fun things, not necessarily for the purpose of doing business. So it doesn't exclude that. And then in Boston, you have a bunch of like techie founders, and then you have techie kind of events. So like for instance, Code Coffee is very techie. You get a lot of engineers, data scientists, designers, people that just want to play with technology. And then there's also like the Boston VR group, or I know there's a couple of like cybersecurity groups in and around Boston, and there's a couple other really fun people. But then you have like Boston New Technology, and then you have like the Breakfast Club, Tech Breakfast Club, or like there's a couple others that I've been meaning to like get around to. And what the exciting thing I'm seeing is similar to what like you're seeing, is that like groups are starting to come back. And now, like if you go went up to meet up like a year ago, there was like nothing. And now there's a lot of groups starting to do regular events, which I think is really critical because unless you have like regular pattern events, it's hard to really build that sense of community. So we're starting to see the regular events come back, different groups coming up around different kinds of topics, and people really starting to like connect again. I don't think we're quite at like the full crescendo. I think that like next year, I'm really excited to see like where a lot of these communities come out. I think like right now it's like a lot of communities are like just getting out of their burrows, like dusting off and like really about to like drive into it. But I think next year we're going to see a lot more interesting communities come up in and around Boston.
I agree. And you said something in your response that stood out to me in terms of, I even put it in the chat. I think you were really purposeful in your differentiation between kind of like the founder zone, the startup zone, and then you have the exclusively techie, but not that exclusive because there is an inclusivity to it too, where you do see some like overlap between founders and builders, whether they're looking for talent to bring on board or whether they're just, happening to meet each other at the events where things often intersect. But I do want to get maybe more of a continued take on that, like intersecting, like that, what happens when the founder community and the tech community, where tech means like very technologist style people, like what do you think has changed about that compared to like back in when I was doing things back in like 2017, 2018? I think there was a little bit more of a, wouldn't necessarily say polarization, but definitely there was kind of like a hard dividing line. But do you think that there's now more of a blending, and is there still more to come of that blending, or is it, what is your take on that?
So I wasn't really well involved in like the communities in and around Boston before the pandemic. It was sort of like I moved around a lot, so it wasn't until like mid-pandemic that I was in the Boston area proper that I could really engage with communities in and around Boston. So I can't really speak to like what this looked like before and after pandemic. Um, but I do see there being a lot of overlap in the founders and techie space, and I think there's a lot of overlap around this idea of building. Is that like there's a shared camaraderie around wanting to build something. I think like where I make the differentiation isn't saying that you can't go to either group, and I actually think there's a lot of people that go to both kinds of groups, and I see a lot of people going both kinds of things.
I
But
agree.
when you have a community, it's usually good to have sort of like this centering point that everyone can like collaborate around. And it's not necessarily a like you can't people from outside can't go there. We once for one of our coded coffee events, we had a graphic, not what was she was a clothes designer came in, a fashion designer came in. She genuinely thought she was going to something else and she got lost and walked into Code and Coffee, and she stayed the entire time because like it's a big thing for like it's inclusivity is that it's not just we're inclusive for the sake of being inclusive, but very fundamental to my philosophy is that everyone has interesting stories and interesting ways to engage. And so like when we were talking to the fashion designer, we were like a lot more like talking about like how her experience with technology is. What does technology look like in like the fashion industry and how does she engage with that? So she's not like our target audience, but she would engage in conversations. But with Code and Coffee, like our center point is around like diving into talking about like really like techie side of things. And so we get a lot of like founders that come around that are either they're technical or they're looking to like recruit technical people or they're trying to like get better understanding of like what the technical landscape looks like. But like there's a lot of overlap between the techies and like the entrepreneurial spirit and startup spirit because both want to build something. I think like when you talk to founders, they're a lot more interested in building like the full company and trying to build something like much more structured, much more formal. But there's still that energy of building that's shared.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I think the nucleus of it all really is that love of building and of seeing things built and of building together. I think one of the most unique and frankly lovable elements of the Boston like innovation ecosystem, like not to get too buzzwordy, but we're going to get a little buzzwordy, is that kind of shared consensus or embrace of like doing really cool things together, like building cool things, whether you're helping to build a business or whether you're helping to build a great program, product, service. And I love the example that you shared with the fashion designer because one of the most like I would say like straight up bohemian experiences I ever had was there's this founder in the community that I dearly love. She's one of my best friends, Emily Zaccardi. So she had a friend, her friend Johanna Mahoney was part of the design community. Like, they had this like design festival at one of the colleges. And I was like thinking to myself, I mean, what am I necessarily going to get out of this? Like, I'm in technology, I do technology things. But, I took her up on her offer. Incidentally, it was on a Saturday too. I went there. It was like 3 or 4 hours of like really enriching programming. And like, what I noticed is exactly what you're speaking to, which is like, there was not just designers there. There were a lot of people from like all over the ecosystem, and we were all like learning together. But before I get to my next question, we have Sharuk here. Sharuk asks, "What are your learnings from hosting so many events?" Because, as you know, Sharuk is wanting to host his own, so it's kind of leaning on your expertise a little bit here.
Because I think Shuruk, if I'm not mistaken, has actually been to Coda Coffee before. But like one of the biggest things that I'm trying to learn right now is we're trying to build Code and Coffee in such a way that if I ever move away out of Boston at some point, that it can continue moving on. That's sort of like the to me one definition of like good strong leadership is that strong leaders are able to leave communities in such a fashion that when they're not there, it still runs. And that takes a lot of sort of intentionality around like how you design, how the community organizes itself, how the leadership works to make sure that people aren't being overloaded, for instance, that the community still is engaged and has momentum because it's very easy to like get something started, but like to hold on to momentum over a long period of time requires a lot of like intentionality to the way that you structure the way you work. So for a big thing that we're seeing with like Code and Coffee is like, okay, how do we structure our planning group? How do we structure our organizers such that we can maintain the community going forward. And like the big learning that I'm trying to figure out is like what is working and what isn't working. And so Code and Coffee, the way we're structured is we have three lead organizers, so myself, Anton, and Cedric. And the idea of the lead organizers is we commit ourselves to be at pretty much any single meetup that we can make, given other life priorities. So I think I attend approximately like every 2 out of 3 meetups or so, and that seems to be about like lead organizers, with the idea that so long as one of us can make it there, the show goes on. So we're the point people, and then we have a set of regular organizers, which are people in our community that have come along, went through an application, and has come on with us. And we, on our roster, have I think like 20 or so people as organizers. But I think one thing that I'm trying to figure out how to do better is trying to like engage people, because we have a lot of organizers that come in, we don't engage them well, and then they sort of wander off and find other things to do. And so one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is like, okay, now that we have this community, how do I make sure that people have a sense of agency? Because people, if they don't feel like they're contributing in some fashion, if they don't feel like they're adding to the cause or moving sort of the main purpose forward, they're going to find somewhere else to work, which they're not going to be as a resource for your community anymore in leadership terms. So I'm currently trying to figure out, I was like, okay, how can we make sure that we give work to people to do, but that work isn't busy work? Because like I hate busy work. I think that like if I ask someone to do something, it genuinely should be returning value to the community. I don't like the idea of asking people to do work that's not going anywhere, because I think it's disrespectful to ask that of somebody, because people's time is valuable. When you ask them to do valueless work, you're not respecting their time. So that's sort of like the big thing that like Code and Coffee, that I'm currently trying to figure out, like how do we set up the community for success long term, is like how do we get people engaged in that community? Because if we can get people engaged in like leading the community and helping grow the community, and more than just me, I have a strong confidence that this can continue on going forward and grow and become an even more cohesive community.
So, I mean, that was beautiful, man. I'm just gonna say it right now because, and I'm gonna name what I found very beautiful. Truly, is there is so much intentionality in what you said around a couple of things. I love the idea of how you see leadership, because there are two things there. There's the thought of leaving behind a legacy that is perfectly capable of like surviving and thriving on its own, but also it's very obvious to me from the sound of your voice, from the way that I know you feel about this so very sincerely, that you don't want to waste people's time. And in fact, you want to make the most use of that time, and you want to like really bring value. So, I mean, I'm faced with very similar things, and it's always nice to, speak with somebody who has this idea of we're building an ecosystem that's a living, breathing thing. It's really not just an ecosystem, it's an organism. And I think one of the proof points that I often share with people is obviously like I'm not the founder of Boston New Technology. That's Chris Rakenna. Chris founded Boston New Technology back in 2009, 2010. I mean, he had a very similar vision to you. And what ended up happening was, and many people know the story, is back in 2021, he got a full time job and he couldn't do Boston New Technology anymore. So people started to freak out because you talk about that, consistency being key. If you build a loving community, they're going to start to notice when things aren't happening. So myself, Jason Krause, Marsh here, who's on the call, we're all like, what's happening? Like, why is the newsletter not going out? Why are there not any events? And so we basically, in a very, I'll admit it now, cheesy Hallmark movie kind of 'tis the season kind of situation where like we got to save Boston New Technology in the sense of like we have to help out Chris because Chris helped us out. Now we're going to help him out because like you, Brian, like he was always like, how can I show up for people and do things for people? So, we went to him and we're like, hey, we can, take Boston New Technology and keep it going. And I think the reason why we did that is exactly what you're trying to do with Code and Coffee. It's like you built something really amazing and we don't want to see anything happen to it. So, I mean, since then, as you know, we've tried to do all kinds of things and are still trying to, but I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is it's not just about making stuff like making events or doing activities. It's really about the culture that you said is like the cornerstone. And in that way, I do have a question. So, in your estimation, what is a really what is really good examples? What are some really good examples of culture in the tech community that you find like the most inspiring, edifying, gratifying? Like, what can you speak a little bit about some of the cultural experiences you had?
So something that I really enjoy that we've been able to do with Code and Coffee is the different kinds of people that come to Code and Coffee. So one of the defining features of Code and Coffee as a community is that we're tech and software engineering tech enthusiasts in general. So there's a lot of other tech communities, but they're usually very focused and refined. So like there's the Boston Python community. There's the which is centered around Python. There's the Boston SQL Microsoft community, which are SQL Microsoft, the VR community around VR. And that's sort of like the traditional setup of most techie style communities. Usually, has one technology, everyone sort of gathers around that one technology. Code and Coffee, we are tech generalist kind of community. We don't say this is only one technology. And because of that, we pull in a lot of different perspectives, lots of different people. There's people that are like early stage, late stage, um, um, people that do design work, people that do product management work, more business oriented people. And the thing that I really enjoy about like the culture that this comes out is that every time I go to a cup of coffee, I'm talking with somebody different. There's different conversations every time I go down, but sometimes I have a conversation with someone that's design centered, and it's like, okay, we're not talking about technology and design, or I'm talking to someone that's like a data scientist, or someone that's we have a lot of people from Northeastern, so I talk to a lot of students, and then there's some people I talk to that are like been doing coding for like 20, 30 years, and it's really cool to go from one conversation to another and getting to see how dynamic of a community it is. And for me, too, something that's also very satisfying about this is that we've been able to maintain this very diverse kind of community. Shows that it's when we say that we're inclusive, we mean it. So like if you ever go to a community and there only seems to be like one kind of person there, it brings up the question is like how inclusive is this organization if only one kind of person ever wants to go to there. So because we get so many different kinds of people from different backgrounds, different lived experiences, and that we've been able to maintain this very diverse group, it makes me feel confident as a leader that we're doing a successful job of hitting this idea of inclusion. Which the benefit of being inclusive is we get all this interesting like connections. And I think this sort of diversity makes you better as a technologist because at the end of the day, good technologists try to solve problems and try to figure out ways we can pull value out of the technology we build. And if you understand different backgrounds and different perspectives, you'll do a better job of assessing where value really is in technology.
I mean, this is something that I learned. I was doing a lot of discussions with somebody today about my father and like all the things he taught me about technology, all the stuff we built together, and that was really one of his core pillars too. Is this idea that you really cannot build in a silo. I mean, you can try, but your efforts will be fruitless. And something else that I think is really powerful about what you said is getting all those different perspectives not only helps you with your problem solving skills, but you will quickly know what kind of community it is by like who's in there and like what they're doing. And so I am going to tread into somewhat, I wouldn't say like controversial waters, but I think it bears asking like, because we've been very, positive. And as you know, as technologists, we're always on the lookout for like problems to solve and bugs to, to deal with. So what are some of the challenges that you think we're coming up against and facing that are worthy challenges? Like they're not just sort of like that busy work, but are really challenges that are taking like a critical look at and attempting to solve like with our utmost efforts.
So when you say so, let me ask you some questions so I understand more of like
Sure. Sure.
where you want to bring the conversation. Is are you talking about like challenges in terms of like community space for technology, or are you talking about like challenges in terms of like technology? Is like the community space is more like
Hmm.
technology is like if what do we see
Yeah,
like
no,
if
I'm glad you pushed back on me on that because yeah, I was going a little bit too broad there, so I appreciate you pushing me back. So I would have you first focus on the community piece because then I feel like in treating the community, we can also think about how a community that's better built would then be able to help people who are solving complex technological problems.
Because I think in the community space, and I think this is like a general broader trend, is that technology becoming more international. Is that you go back 30, 40 years, and technology was very United States centric. Like the web was built here, a lot of early tech startups were built here, and it was really hard to connect on like an international frame. Like there was a ton of friction with trying to interact like across the world. But now a lot of that friction has been reduced or almost entirely eliminated with now like Zoom being ubiquitous. I just had a conversation this morning with someone from the Philippines that does tech. Imagine, like, I could not imagine doing that like 10 or 20 years ago. But this lack of friction means that our community in technology is a lot more international. There's like the United States isn't the only place that's doing technology. We have like a lot of representation from like Europe, a lot of representation from Asia, like India, from China, and we have a lot different perspectives that are now involved in our tech community. Um, and so this diversity of background is, I think, sort of like the next biggest challenge with tech. Is diversity is really great in terms of it helps you see the world from a wider lens, but it also opens up a lot of avenues for miscommunication or misunderstanding because people come from different sort of cultural backgrounds, different expectations. So it makes your communities more rewarding, but you have to be a lot more intentional about inclusion in communication and talking to people and building rapport. Is that and I've already made like one or two mistakes already in that like I said something where I wasn't very careful about my word choice, and then the interpretation in a different cultural context was it came off of what I said came off as hurtful. And luckily the people that I talked to, they, because I built rapport, because I like built this genuine community and tried to genuinely connect with them, they were kind enough to pull me aside and be like, hey, this was hurtful, this was not an appropriate thing to say, because of like the cultural background that I came from. And but because we have this rapport, this trust in this community that we started with, that this rapport that built, we can try to navigate this diversity, and try to navigate the challenges of having different sort of like cultural conceptions and perceptions. And that way we can bring out really the value in community, which is getting this wider lens, being able to deliver on more value, to be able to engage more people.
I mean, and also for what it's worth, I've had similar enlightening experiences, like, teachable moments where I'm fascinated by global entrepreneurship. But I mean, similar to yourself, like, I grew up in a particular way. I mean, we all do. We all grow up in a certain way. And, despite the fact that I'm very internationally minded, obviously, like, I have my own preconceived biases. I have like all these things that, like, I need to work on. And so whenever I try to build things in different countries, I always, have to be, and I try to be very mindful of like the various nuances that, that are at play. And like, I feel like, especially with Boston being such an international hub, this is something that we're going to have to continue working on. I mean, I think what we saw with, this is kind of like segueing into Startup Weekend just a bit, is we saw that like very diverse like showing up of folks, not only like different ages and different genders and, different nationalities, but also people who are at very different, situations in terms of their project state. So do you think that, I guess my question would be, do you think it takes something like a startup weekend? So, in other words, do you think one of the ways in which we can learn more about each other and really embrace that diversity is by building, which is one of the big overarching themes that we're exploring here? Do you think it takes a build or building with someone to learn those lessons more than, say, for example, just sort of like doing something like this, like just having a conversation?
Well, I think with the idea of building and like diversity, especially diversity in background that people have, one of the things that I really enjoy about technology is how accessible it is. And what I mean by accessibility is there is I been working as a software engineer for 5 years, and before that, I had a 4-year computer science degree, and before that, I was at a vocational technical school. So I've been doing like technology, playing in and around technology, building computers, and even before that, my dad built computers when I was a kid, and I used to help him
My,
build computers.
my
So
dad
I've
did.
been doing
Yeah, we have that in common.
yeah, so I've been doing technology for a very long time. There is not a single thing I don't know that you can't find out on a Google search. There's no like hidden secrets. I know no like secret passcodes. I know no secret handshakes. I know no sort of like secret phrases, secret words, magic spells. Everything I know, you can find on a Google search in 2 seconds. Um, and I love it. I know a lot of people are intimidated with that, but I genuinely find that that's something that's amazing with technology is that like you can for nearly free. I mean, there's a cost to having like the devices, and that can be difficult for a lot of people that don't have either good internet connection, access to internet, access to devices, access. But in a broad sense, it's very accessible, very cheap to access this information and get access to this information. And this has not been the case historically, especially across the board with a lot of fields. But there's everything that's online, that's that information that you can access. And then the other big thing too is that technology is such a fast-moving field that it's something that new people can jump in with and have something that established people don't have, which is like there's plenty of times I talk to like university students, or I talk to people that have a little bit less experience than I do, and they're able to talk to me about all this new AI stuff that I have no idea what's going on. I'm so busy doing my 9 to 5 job, I don't have the time to study a lot of this new technology. And now I'm learning something from people that have substantial like years on the board than I do. So when we're talking about like building things, because of how accessible it is, when you can build a team of people that have different kinds of backgrounds, different kinds of experiences, there is genuinely technology, something everyone can bring to the table, regardless of how many years of experience, so long as like everyone there is curiosity minded and they're wanting to learn and wanting to grow. I think that's something that's exciting. Is it's like like I can talk to somebody that is 20 more years of experience, that's something to learn. I can talk to somebody that has 5 less years of experience and have something to learn.
It's such a it's like a wondrous like laboratory sort of like situation where I mean we have people like you said who we can turn to that have so much experience, but even those who don't, their curiosity is like super inspiring, but also the fact that they're more or less a blank slate, like they have yet to like really get some of that knowledge and they're like hungry for it. They're thinking about it, like all of that. I mean, that's just I really appreciate that and enjoy that. But also, you brought back a lot of happy memories because I used to build computers all the time with my dad. And one of the things that he taught me, whether we were building, desktops or working on other people's computers in general, was you got to love the process too. Like it can be frustrating. I remember we had this one motherboard that for the life of me just would not work, and we were trying so many things. We were practically doing like incantations, seances, but like nothing was happening. But when I see specific things like startup weekends, and I see that as a great place to learn and like wrap your arms around things, that's very inspiring to me too. And I remember looking at some of the photos from when we had the last one, and literally seeing people like huddled over, like working like an old-fashioned painting, something by Rembrandt maybe, where like people were working on a surgery, and like you have people who are like the corner of the room, they're like looking at things, seeing how things are doing. You have like the mentor or the mentor standing there. I mean, do you think? I guess my next question would be in terms of your experience at Startup Weekend, first as like somebody that was just, doing things, building things, and now you're part of our team, like what are you like most excited about what's going to be happening like next time when we do like V2?
What I enjoyed a lot about Startup Weekend is that you build a sense of camaraderie when you can build something with people. And Startup Weekend is set up in such a way that everyone can contribute. So, like, if you go to a Startup Weekend and you have a technical background, you can build like a prototype, build demos. But if you come with no technical experience, there's enough like help with like business management, even down to like the team that I had a bunch of people that had a lot of were in high school and they didn't really have a lot of like learned experience because of their stage in life. But they were able to like interview people. They were able to help with the presentation. They were able to help build resources. They were able to help get things done. So long as there was like someone else that was able to help guide them that had a little bit more experience. So the fact that everyone can come to a startup weekend and participate and be genuinely involved and and I think like it does a good job of like getting that taste of what it's like with doing a company, of having to like iterate, of having to pivot, of having to make hard decisions, of having to balance your time as a resource that you only have a limited amount of, and trying to really understand the problem. I think Startup Weekends is a phenomenal foray into like the startup mindset, the business mindset. But it's also a genuine opportunity for you to like connect with people, to build something cool, and to really like get to feel like you're part of something bigger.
I agree. I oftentimes remark on the the model of success in terms of how things are set up in such a way that with that 54 hours of golden time, like golden opportunity, like you're able to do so much. And I mean, I've said this to at this point probably hundreds of people because I'm so excited about it. But I think you might remember Hitomi from the startup weekend, and when we were collecting feedback, I mean, as a community builder, I know you'll appreciate this. We're used to getting like certain forms of feedback, like it's either positive, it's negative, but it's usually very like it's very like one way or the other. So it's like I like this, I didn't like that. And it's very like A, B, C. But the thing about Hitomi and the thing about a lot of the like organic engagement that we got afterward was like she said, I think I found my people. And like as a community person, but also as a technologist, like when I hear that, it's like it works. This works. There's like there's an indication that we're doing things in the right direction, and it's my hope and my persistent belief that we can actually do this in a lot of different ways, not just with like Startup Weekend, but like going back to some of our other discussion points, like building better community in the Boston tech community, like in general. I think, for example, about like Brazilian coders and everything that they do. Taking people who don't know anything about software, and giving them the education, and then putting them, giving them the employment opportunities too. I wonder, as we get towards the end here, what are you most excited about learning next, besides like the things you mentioned about in your role, your like organizing role, code and coffee, like what fascinates you, like what keeps you up at night and makes you perpetually so curious? Can you let us like under the hood there a bit?
Well, I do want to get to that question, but one thing that I think is really funny about Hitomi, and then also going back to your question about like
Of course,
the integration of different communities, is that Hitomi is actually on the Coding Coffee planning group. So she helps us
amazing.
out with bringing in speakers. And like one of the reasons that I'm helping out with the next startup weekend is that like of the 18 like finalists of the 1 minute pitch contest, we had 5 people there that were part of the Coding Coffee planning group. And like it's really funny because we had a Code and Coffee meetup the same weekend as the last uh, um, startup weekend, and we had a dip of attendance. And the reason we had a dip of attendance is because like a good chunk of people ended up going to startup weekend, not the Code and Coffee, which is like the best reason to get a dip in attendance, in my
Amazing.
opinion, because I want people to be engaged in community, and I'm just happy to see that there's somewhere where they're engaging in community. I don't necessarily think they need to be at a Code and Coffee, but I'm glad to see that they're somewhere. So I thought that was a particularly amusing thing at the last Tech Startup Weekend. It's one of the reasons why I want to help out with the next one, because I genuinely see that this is an opportunity that people in my community, in the Code and Coffee community, have valued. Um, so that's part of my personal impetus with helping out with that. But as for what like fascinates me and what I want to learn next is I love two big fascinations. I love understanding how people interact with technology, and I'm also really fascinated with how an idea becomes reality. So right now I'm really focused on like that ladder of like how ideas become reality. Is I've hit a point in my career where I realized that the ideas that I have that I want to really like manifest into reality have become such a size that I can't do it by myself. I physically do not have enough time to code all the technology that I want to play around with and build. Is that I get a bunch of ideas that I want to have time for, but I just don't have them anymore. And so what that means for me is I need to figure out how to engage people, how to do the leadership, how to get more people to help me build cool things. And this is bringing me towards the startup founder space because it's like, okay, if I want to build cool things, I want to bring these ideas to reality, I need to start building businesses. I need to start understanding how what that looks like, what that process looks like. So I'm starting to go into like my intros. I'm playing around right now with doing a startup. Funny enough, the team that I did startup weekend last weekend, we're continuing with that idea moving forward. And so we're currently talking about like trying to have something that we can sell midway through next year. And we're currently in open conversations around that. But my real fascination is like, okay, I've got a lot of the technology background, but the business aspect, like the how to actually form a group, how do you get people incentivized in the right way, how do you bring in the financial sponsorships or the financial aspect of this so people can actually focus on building this idea out without having to worry about where they're going to get feed themselves. That's sort of like where my current fascination is and where I'm trying to like play around with and learn a lot more right now.
Phenomenal, man. So I did this next bit with Irina, who you might remember from the startup weekend as well when we did her fireside chat. So before I give you the last word, before we close things out, and again, thank you everybody for joining. I want to do two things. First, I want you to ask me a question, any question you have, don't care what it is, and then yeah, well, I'm gonna give you the last word to take us out after that, after I answer.
So, so you've been around the Boston community. Can you think of like one time where you went to like either a community event and not the last Startup Weekend because you already talked about that, where you felt really included, that someone helped made you feel included in an event, and how did they make you feel included?
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you asked me that, Brian, because this is one of my favorite stories to tell people. So, and a lot of people will recognize where I go with this once I mention the name, Startup Boston or Startup Boston Week. So, just for a little bit of like contextual background, like I was part of like, meaning I was able to go to the very first one in 2017, and man, oh man, was that like a magic moment for me. But the magic really happened in a very unexpected way because it was held at, so Startup Boston Week 2017 was hosted primarily at CIC Boston on 50 Milk Street. And I remember I had seen the event on Eventbrite, and I know it was also incidentally advertised in the Boston New Technology newsletter. So I signed up for it. I'm like, this sounds so cool. And when I went there, I was like so excited. And there was this woman in the elevator. She was very bright, very bubbly, very excited. She's like, "Hey, welcome. Are you going to like Startup Boston Week?" I'm like, "Actually, yeah, I am. Like, that's so cool. Like, are you part of it?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm part of it. We're on like I forget what floor it was, but she's like, we're on this floor." And so I'm like, cool, like let's go up together. And like I found my seat. They were doing one of the first panels. So this woman who I was just talking to in the elevator goes up to the dais and starts speaking. And she's like, "Hey everybody, it's me, Stephanie Rulick, lead organizer of Startup Boston Week." And I'm like, this, the way she greeted me, the way I felt in terms of like that initial embrace of like hospitality. So that planted like the first seeds of like being like, all right, yeah, I can show here. I can learn here, be a part of this. But that wasn't the whole thing. So like I stayed. I went to lots of different panels, lots of different things. And at the end of it, I not only felt smarter, I not only had made many more connections and stuff, but I did feel included. I most definitely did. And then the same thing happened with like Startup Grind Boston, a lot of other places. I mean, really, that's why I'm here. If somebody were to ask me like, why do you do what you do? Like, you could be doing anything else right now. So like, why do you do this? It's because, I mean, I was coming from nowhere. I mean, yeah, I grew up in Boston my whole life, but there was no like startup stuff in my background. So people like seem to like me. They pulled out chairs, they handed me slices of pizza. A lot of people like you, Brian, and that in terms of like having that personality of like wanting people to feel included, and like that's why I stuck on and did the things that I did. And so now I want to thank you for asking me that question. You know, the warm and fuzzy question. I love it. I want you to take us out. I want you to talk about like whatever you want here at the end and tell people how they can get in touch with you, and we'll just wrap it up after that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do. I'm obligated to do a plug for Code and Coffee. So we do Code and Coffee every other Saturday from noon to three, and usually in the CIC building. Sometimes we have some other venues we end up doing our meetup in. You can find us on meetup.com. We're also part of Code and Coffee Community National, which is a national tech community that we have, I think, right around 30 chapters around the United States. If you go to like codeandcoffee.org, you can find where our meetups are. If you're not in Boston, you're from somewhere else, we try to make sure that like all the different Code and Coffee events and communities are all very inclusive, very engaging, the same way that we do it here in Boston. And that's my big plug. But the only other thing I just want to do is one of the reasons why I asked you that question, Steve, in talking about like what it takes to build a community, being intentional, is that the core building a community, the experiences just like you had, and usually when you talk to people that are really compassionate community leaders, there's always an experience like that. Because I can remember I've had a couple different experiences like that in different groups that I wasn't part of before, where I felt included and I felt welcome. And I think what's really important is that like as organizations become bigger, as communities become bigger, and more complications come in, it's really important that we don't forget that thing. That no, the most important thing is like the small words you tell people when you see them. Like that's the most important thing. Like if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how you structure your organization. You have to make sure that you keep that front and center.
You're the greatest, man. That was really, really awesome. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining us for, again, our very first nighttime edition of the Fireside Chat series. I've had a blast with you, Brian. Like, let's do this again real soon. Uh, and we'll see everybody next time. But thank you again. And yeah,